A few years ago, I stopped dead in my tracks and I went like that on my way to get a glass of water when I heard the great golfer Arnold Palmer on television. And what he said with great humility, any system works. Well, that captured me. My nonverbal reaction became a running joke between me and my partner because he knows I have little interest in golf. Baseball is my game, go Mets. Golf remains in left field for me, but systems theory is my home plate. In general semantics terms, theory or a system can be looked at as a conditional mental map that can be tweaked or interpreted, redefining the perceptual territory. We heard a lot about perception, and I thank you for that. In less than 2 minutes, Arnold Palmer summarized, for many others, including me, required several books. System and Change, Ways of Knowing came from an expert who spoke about what he learned literally from the ground up. This felt like a mental home run to me. I was very excited. And I actually found out that he didn't do any reading. It's good to know people who know people. 3 thoughts emerged. The scientific method is an open system, but it is also a very dynamic process that unfolds on a continuum pregnant with possibilities, some known, some unknown. Any theory or system about the human species, whether inside out or outside in, captures the relational aspect between people, culture, and communication. Communication is like life itself, a dynamic, ongoing process with some regularities, and we're always bouncing back and forth between them. As Spinoza told us, only change is unchanging. Individuals share certain culturally derived trans-situational symbols and meanings, which help define situations for them. Human conduct cannot be understood outside of its temporal and spatial context. One's perception of the reality of the situation is subjective, yet it is subjectively determined by socialization into the culture. Korzybski's concept time binding reminds us of this fluidity described in general semantics as time 1, time 2, time 3. Well, if we substitute the word culture for time, we're talking about culture 1, culture 2, culture 3, and so on. This type of longitudinal analysis is considered the gold standard in empirical research, and it is the basis of scientific method, empirical research. The interplay between culture and language is primary for Korzybski and Mead. The meaning and understanding of people moves back and forth between these layers and levels of analysis within our social systems. That's the real key, because social systems are larger than we imagine at times, and their influence. I'll talk more about that later. Both aim to answer the question, what's going on between individuals and their culture in different contexts. If their ideas were a marriage, the groomsmen at the wedding would be of Korzybski and Mead would be Charles Horton Cooley, who developed the concept, the looking glass self, his term for what we would call self-reflexivity, the ability that separates us from other animals. Cooley and Mead worked hand in glove together on this at the University of Michigan between 1891 and 1894. The 3 young children of Cooley became the case studies for observing language and symbol acquisition, role-playing, role-taking, gestures, and gaming. They decided once these skills emerge and are part of the person, that's how self-reflexivity starts. Cooley came up with the idea of significant symbol first, then significant other, to mark the hierarchical nature of human systems. Most of us place the primary group feeling on our family. Sometimes we get messed up if we bring it to work, but our primary affiliation starts in the family. Other group affiliations he labeled secondary groups, and secondary groups can be part of the larger social system or a smaller entity. Mead extended, but no matter what, I'm sorry, I have trouble seeing. No matter what the group priority, self-reflexive behavior indicates there is interaction between our cultural norms and us. Mead extended the self-reflexivity into the world of adults with his most famous aphorism that says, I looks at me as a reflexive self. We are both the subject and object of ourselves. This begs the question, when we talk to ourselves, just who is it that we are talking to? The answer, communications theorists, is we are both the actors and observers of our own behavior and our drama. In our ongoing communication, we are constantly watching and altering our responses in reaction to others. An unspoken question is going on. How am I doing? Korzybski described the self-reflexive dynamic as living in a room full of mirrors. A second groomsman at the wedding of Korzybski and Mead is W.I. Thomas, who addressed perception when he said, define a situation as real, it is real in its consequences. Systems, people, and perception remain the focus of the theories of all these four scholars forever. From the late 19th century to 2022 is a very long period to be described as time one, but keep that in mind for a moment. In 1895, James Hayden Tufts convinced Mead and John Dewey to move together from the University of Michigan to the University of Chicago, where W.I. Thomas was working with Florian Zanicki, excuse me, where there were 350,000 Polish immigrants living. I'm going to jump ahead. According to Bob Pula, Korzybski was very involved. Was very involved in the Polish immigration groups everywhere in the United States and Canada, and he even recruited people to go over to fight the war in Europe. So in 1938, Alfred Korzybski's first General Institute was 3 blocks down from the University of Chicago. So there was some history and interaction going on. Although I could only find one mention of W.I. Thomas by Korzybski, and that was in his lectures. What became known as the Thomas theorem, define a situation as real, it is real in its consequences, is the perceptual drumbeat beneath both Mead and Korzybski. Other contemporary scholars, Adelbert Ames, who was considered the father of perception, said believing is seeing. Communications theorist Leigh Thier told us you can't separate the know from the known. And media ecologist Ed Wachtell, who was raised a Catholic, said there is no such thing as the immaculate perception. Time two. On September 16th this year, the New York Times reported a study that showed through the brain scans, people's brain activity lined up after conversations where consensus was achieved. This would mean diplomacy can work among reasonable people, and Korzybski was right on track, believing that better language patterns could help stop our primitive, non-rational, inhuman, and destructive wars. It is through technology that we might learn how our brains actually work. And when we find out how all the theories of mind, self, and society actually work, we may be making some changes. We don't know what the brain scans will reveal, and we don't know what they'll say about our discursive thinking and our tacit knowledge. Oh my. Okay, I'm just going to wing it with tacit knowledge because I can't really see. Tacit knowledge is our intuition. Everything that we know that we can't put in discursive language is considered tacit knowledge. Michael Pagliani came up with this idea we can say, we know more than we can say. This is saying that what we can't say with words and language, we sort of know. And I think that we learned a lot about that this weekend, that artists are moving forward with tacit knowledge. And his most famous aphorism, I'm trying to read it, but can't find it. Okay. I see. Here it is. Ways of knowing. Skill, experience, insight, creativity, and judgment all come into play. His aphorism, we know more than we can tell. By this he meant we know more than we can say using linear discursive talk. Things like driving a car, face recognition, cooking, riding a bike, swimming, sex, dancing, and athletics have components that all have tacit, intuitive aspects to them. And we're limited by our language, but we're not limited by our brains. And I think that we saw a lot of that back and forth in communications. We would call it discursive and analogic thinking, holistic. In psychology, they might call it gestalt thinking. Okay. So, sorry. Okay. So Spinoza told us, if you want the present to be different from the past, study the past. However, we need to know what was going on at both the micro and macro levels of the context before we attempt to figure out what's going on with change. And I think Dash and several others mentioned it. And language patterns happen at the level of the individual, and that's the micro level. Societal change happens at the social structural level. For example, institutions like family, education, government, legal, military, and media, of course, are the largest systems. And we heard about legal from Susan and Gary. The largest systems that define and limit our behavior. But moment to moment, I heard someone say, and I didn't see who it was yesterday, walking around, it's very hard to understand context. Well, that's why it's hard, because they're superimposed in all different layers and levels. And so we don't know how brain scans will unravel any of that. But I've never stopped thinking about what Corey Anton told us in How Non-Being Haunts Being. Most of the time, we are not dispassionate, clear-headed truth tellers. We seem to love a good story more than we love the truth, especially if the truth is difficult, while the story brings comfort and provides a warm sense of security. To me, this means we can turn anything from any of those layers and levels of life into a significant symbol, a significant other, and place that at the top of our hierarchy. We don't know how that works, but we can dig in our heels, and we have plenty of obvious stuff going on in our politics with that. Any idea, any person can become our primary reference group, and we don't know how that works. And I don't think that brain scans will tell us, but it does impinge on the definition of our own personal thinking and self-reflexivity, and how we define things is the key underneath it. So I'd like to just talk about the rational and non-rational, and I'm winding up with going to wrap up and describe something that happened recently. I walked into a friend's apartment and the husband was shouting, "Shut up, you don't know what you're talking about." And the wife was standing with her arms on her hips looking at him. And since he's a kind of big guy, about the size of Jackie Gleason playing Ralph Cramden in The Honeymooners, I immediately thought of Ralph saying, "I'm the king of the castle," and his wife, Alice, played by Audrey Meadows, is a nothing and a nobody. We learn in the comedy skit the dictator who dominates always loses in the end. Alice snaps back, redefines the situation. It is only through the eyes of Alice that Ralph becomes aware his behavior's out of line. Only then does his humility arrive with his blubbering humana, humana, humana. This one quick scenario of the comedy writer, the artist, and we have plenty of artists here today, establishes the social status, the presumed pecking order, demonstrates roles and that they have reciprocals, roles only function with reciprocals, and reveals how the formation of human identity is partially self-defined, is continuously constructed and reconstructed in interaction with others, with culture and cultural mandates dominating. I'd say that's a lot of tacit knowledge. And Marcia McLuhan did tell us to observe the artists. They often function as the trial balloons ahead of the rest of society. They can clarify for us what is really going on in the tacit dimension. I wrote around this page as people were talking, artists, emergent phenomenon, creativity, and serendipity. So are we moving along creating and emerging, and I think with technology, as I can attest to, it's taking over. And do we want to get it right, or do we want to get it done as part of our cultural heritage from all these superstructures that are around us? So we sort of lose our humanity, and the only way that we can go forward is to look at what Goffman called definitions of the situations. Others did. W.I. Thomas started it, but uh, only by capturing it in a particular past can we move it to can we figure out why that should be different going, or might be different on any level going forward. So I will end by saying diplomacy might work. And I'm sorry, I'm sort of a handicapped person up here, but thank you very much for your attention.